There is a moment in every warrior's life when the world goes quiet, and the only sound left is the echo of his own pain. Most people run from that feeling, hide from it, drown it, name it unfair, call it weakness. But in the old Japanese traditions, the warrior does the opposite. He steps toward the flame. Because he knows pain is a forge. Untermund, the spirit that endures it, becomes steel. This is the story of a young man named Ren, broken by failure, hunted by fear, standing at the edge of abandoning his path. And the ancient mentor who teaches him that discipline is not punishment. It is the sharpening of the unseen blade within. You will witness how silence becomes a teacher, how struggle becomes a compass, how presence cuts through ego, and how a wounded spirit can transform into unshakable strength when guided by an ancient system of inner mastery. This is not inspiration. This is initiation. Welcome to the Japanese way to turn pain into power. Welcome to the Forge, Chapter 1, the wound that opens the path. The story begins on a night when the world felt heavier than Ren's body could bear. Rain hammered against the narrow wooden roof of his small apartment, each drop sounding like an accusation. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp paper, the remnants of projects he had abandoned, plans he once believed in, dreams now crumpled and scattered across the floor. He sat alone in the dim light, shoulders curved inward, as if trying to hide from the weight of his own existence. Failure does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it slips quietly into your life, and only when it has settled deep inside you do you realize something has broken. Ren felt that break, a fracture not of bone, but of spirit. For months he had poured every ounce of strength into an opportunity he believed would define his future, and when it collapsed, so did he. His ego, once loud, once confident, now whispered poisonous truths. You were never enough. You were foolish to try. This pain means stop. He believed it. He let the voice guide him into isolation, away from the world, away from his own potential. Psychology calls this the collapse response, when the nervous system, overwhelmed, chooses withdrawal instead of fight. In ancient Japanese texts, they described it differently. The spirit curls like a leaf under frost. Ren's spirit had curled completely. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the shutters. Something inside him cracked a little more. Burdened by shame, he stepped out into the rain, seeking movement, escape, anything. Water soaked through his clothes instantly, but he welcomed the cold. He walked down the empty path toward the forest outside the town, breathing in rough, uneven gulps. The world blurred. His thoughts tore at him like sharp talons. He stumbled. When he lifted his head, he saw a figure standing beneath an old cedar tree, unmoving, untouched by the violence of the storm. An elderly man in a weathered kimono, hands folded behind him, posture grounded like a rooted mountain. Ren blinked, unsure whether this was a hallucination, born of exhaustion. The old man opened his eyes. They were calm, steady, and entirely unafraid of the storm. "You are in pain," the man said. Ren's throat tightened. I don't know what I'm doing anymore." The old man stepped closer, rain gliding off his shoulders as if refusing to disturb him. "Pain is not your enemy," he said. "It is your beginning." The words cut through the storm more sharply than thunder. Ren shook his head. "My pain ended everything." "No," the old man replied. Your fear ended everything. Pain is simply the messenger. The man studied Ren with the depth of someone who had witnessed countless lives collapsing and rebuilding. Beneath his gaze, Ren felt stripped of excuses. His ego tried to rise, tried to defend itself, but the rain washed those defenses away. Listen, the man continued. The world teaches you to run from suffering, but the warrior walks toward it. He allows pain to carve away illusion, ego, and weakness. Only then does his true spirit appear. Ren felt something shift, small, subtle, but real. A quiet flicker inside the ashes. The man turned toward a narrow mountain path. If you wish to understand your pain, he said softly, follow me. Ren hesitated, fear clinging to him like wet clothes, but something deeper, older than his fear, urged him forward. And so, with trembling steps, Ren followed the stranger into the storm, unaware that his path had just opened. The mountain path was narrow, slick with rain, and swallowed by shadows. Ren followed the elderly man with cautious steps, unsure whether he was walking toward guidance or deeper into his own unraveling. Yet the man's steady posture, his unhurried pace, created a strange sense of safety, as if the storm itself respected him. After a long climb, they reached a small overhang of rock. The man stopped beneath it, sheltering them from the worst of the rain. He lowered himself onto a smooth stone and nodded for Ren to sit. Ren hesitated, soaked and shivering. Why are you helping me? You don't know me, the old man answered without looking at him. I know the expression of a spirit that has turned against itself. Ren's breath caught. How? How do you fix that? You do not fix it, the man said. You face it. A silence settled, not the empty kind, but the full, heavy silence that demands truth. Ren stared at the ground. Everything I worked for, everything I believed, it all collapsed. Maybe I wasn't meant for it. The man turned to him, eyes bright despite the darkness. Your wound feels final, because you believe pain is proof of unworthiness. But pain is simply pressure, and pressure reveals what is weak so it can be strengthened. He lifted his hand and pressed a finger against the stone beneath them. This rock was formed by the earth's suffering, heat, compression, fire. Without pressure, it would never have become strong. Ren swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words. The old man continued, voice as steady. In the samurai tradition, when a student failed, he was not shamed. He was guided, because failure is a direction, not a verdict. But it hurts, Ren whispered. Of course it does, the man said. Growth demands discomfort. Muscles strengthen through tearing. Steel is hardened through flame. The spirit is no different. Ren looked up at him, rainwater dripping from his chin. Who are you? The man exhaled lightly, as if the question was irrelevant. Some call me Kaiden. I teach those who wish to understand themselves. Am I one of those people? Ren asked. Kaiden studied him for a long moment. That depends. Are you willing to stop running? Ren felt the question lodge deep inside him. A simple line, yet it carried the force of 1,000 truths. His entire life had been a negotiation with fear, moving forward only when success felt guaranteed, withdrawing the moment pain appeared. I don't know if I'm strong enough, Ren said honestly. Kaiden nodded. That is why the path begins here. At the moment, you admit your weakness. The moment ego loosens its grip, This is where transformation begins. The rain eased, softening into a distant whisper. Caden rose to his feet. "If you want to understand your pain," he said, "you will come with me to the mountains at dawn. There you will learn what the warrior learns first, to see clearly." Ren felt torn between terror and curiosity, but something about Kaiden's presence, grounded, unshaken, ancient in its calm, made refusal impossible. He nodded. Kaiden bowed slightly, just enough to acknowledge Ren's choice. "Good. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, you begin walking toward yourself." As Caden turned and began descending the path, Ren watched him disappear into the curtain of rain. For the first time in months, the hollow inside him felt less like a void and more like a doorway. The storm did not feel hostile anymore. It felt cleansing. Chapter 2: Silence is the first blade. Dawn rose slowly over the mountains, painting the sky with muted shades of ash and amber. Mist hugged the ground, as if the earth itself was exhaling after a long night. Ren climbed steadily, following Kaiden along a narrow stone path carved by centuries of footsteps. With each step, the noise inside his mind, the regret, the fear, the unanswered questions, pressed harder against him. Kaiden walked ahead, silent, steady, unbothered by the steep terrain. His posture alone conveyed something Ren couldn't name, a presence that felt unshakable. After nearly an hour, the path opened into a clearing. A wooden dojo stood on the cliff's edge, humble yet dignified, its dark beams polished by time. A single bell hung at the entrance. It did not ring in the wind. It waited. This place, Caden said, was built for those who wished to meet themselves. Ren stepped inside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of cedar and incense. The floorboards creaked softly under his weight. Everything felt intentional. The emptiness, the stillness, the light filtering through rice paper walls. Kaiden gestured to the center of the room. "Sit." Ren obeyed, crossing his legs awkwardly. Kaiden settled in front of him, spine straight as a blade. "We begin where all warriors begin," Kaiden said, "with silence." Ren nodded, expecting instructions, breathing techniques, mental exercises, something structured. But Kaiden simply closed his eyes and sank into stillness. Ren waited and waited. The quiet grew heavier. He tried to mimic Kaiden's posture. His back tensed, legs burned, thoughts complained. The silence did not feel peaceful. It felt confrontational. Inside Ren's mind, voices began shouting, "Why are you doing this? You're wasting time. You're not built for this. You should leave now." His chest tightened. His breath became shallow. He opened his eyes, hoping Caden would end the exercise, but the old man remained unmoving. A mountain disguised as a human. Minutes felt like hours. Ren clenched his jaw. "How long do we sit?" Kaiden did not open his eyes. "Until you can hear your pain without turning away." Ren swallowed. The answer felt impossible. Kaiden continued, voice low and even. "In the old traditions, silence was the first blade a warrior learned to wield. Not the sword, not the spear. Silence. Because the mind is a battlefield, and most warriors lose their war before ever lifting a weapon." Ren looked down. "I thought we'd start with training. How something active." "This is training," Kaiden said. "Stillness demands more strength than motion. When the body stops, the truth begins to speak. Ren tried again. He closed his eyes. He breathed slowly. He listened. At first, there was only discomfort, the ache of his spine, the throbbing of his knees. But then he began to notice something beneath the physical pain, a quieter vibration, a restless hum. It was fear, not loud, not violent, just persistent. Caden must have sensed the shift in him. Good, he said softly. The warrior does not banish fear. He observes it. He learns its shape. Ren's hands trembled. It feels like everything I'm afraid to admit. That is the purpose of silence, Kaiden answered. It removes the world so you can meet the person you have been running from. Ren breathed through the heaviness. This was different from the silence of his apartment. That silence felt empty, suffocating. This silence felt expectant, like it was teaching him something ancient and unavoidable. Kaiden finally opened his eyes. You will sit like this every morning. You will not fight the silence. You will allow it to sharpen you. Ren exhaled shakily. I didn't know silence could hurt. Caiden's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but approval. Only because it is working. Outside, the morning bell finally chimed. One clear note, sharp enough to cut the air. The hours that followed were unlike anything Ren had ever experienced. Caden led him through alternating cycles of stillness and slow walking meditation, each designed to expose a different layer of his inner landscape. There were no swords, no drills, no displays of martial skill, nothing Ren had imagined when he pictured training. Instead, there was only presence, and presence, he was learning, was far heavier to carry than any weapon. By midday, Ren's legs were trembling, his breath was uneven, his mind felt scraped raw. Thoughts rose like waves, memories of failure, guilt from words he wished he hadn't spoken, visions of futures he feared he would never reach. Every one of them demanded attention. Everyone tried to pull him out of the moment. Caden watched him closely, studying the micro-expressions that betrayed his struggle. Finally, the old man spoke. You believe silence is a void, he said, but the warrior sees silence as a mirror. Ren frowned, trying to catch his breath. A mirror? Caden nodded. Most people spend their lives reacting to noise, to pressure, to other people's expectations. Their minds are like disturbed water. Nothing can be seen clearly, but when the water stills, the truth reflects. Ren stared at the wooden floor, glossy with the sheen of time. What if I don't like what I see? Caden stepped closer, crouching so he could look Ren directly in the eyes. Then you have found the exact place you must begin. The words settled into Ren like stones dropped into deep water. He wanted to argue, to insist that some truths were too heavy, but he couldn't deny it. Every time the silence deepened, he felt the outlines of his pain more sharply. Not as a single wound, but as many, the fear of disappointing people, the shame of trying and failing, the belief that he had no place on any meaningful path. Silence had exposed these without mercy, yet without cruelty. Kaiden stood again, walking to the open doorway of the dojo. Outside, the wind shifted through the cedars, their branches whispering like an old chant. In the samurai schools, Caden said, students were taught that the sword you forge in your hand means nothing if the one inside you remains dull. The inner blade is sharpened first through breath, posture, and presence. He turned slightly, glancing at Ren. You cannot master your life if you cannot sit with your own mind. Ren let the words wash over him. They hurt, but they also illuminated something. Every time he had panicked, quit, withdrawn, it wasn't because the world defeated him. It was because his mind had become unbearable, and he had never learned how to face it. Caden extended a hand. Come. Ren rose, legs stiff. He followed Caden outside to a narrow balcony overlooking the endless stretch of fog-covered forest. The air was crisp. The silence here felt different, less confronting, more expansive. Caden placed Ren's hand on the wooden railing. Feel this, he instructed. The world beneath your mind. The presence beneath your fear. Ren inhaled slowly. For the first time all morning, his breath didn't catch. Something inside him softened. Not a victory, but a release, like loosening a knot that had been strangling him for years. Caden spoke with quiet authority. The first blade is silence, because it teaches you to separate pain from the stories built around it. Pain is real. The story is optional. Ren closed his eyes. He listened to the wind, to his breath, to the space between thoughts. For a brief moment, the roaring noise inside him eased. Not gone, but quieter, manageable. Caden nodded, sensing the shift. Good. You are beginning to witness yourself without flinching. Ren opened his eyes. Is that really the first step to becoming stronger? It is the only step, Caden said. All strength begins with seeing clearly. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, Ren felt something subtle yet profound. Not confidence, not triumph, but alignment. As if, for the first time, he was no longer fighting wrong battles. The silence did not feel like an enemy anymore. It felt like a teacher. Chapter 3. Discipline. The ancient system of inner strength. Before dawn, the dojo was utterly still, a darkness not of absence, but of anticipation. Ren woke to the sound of Kaiden's footsteps, soft yet resolute, like a drumbeat, signaling the beginning of something irreversible. Up, Kaiden said quietly. Discipline begins before the sun. Ren pushed himself upright, muscles aching from yesterday's stillness. He expected meditation again, or perhaps instructions on swordwork. Instead, Kaiden handed him a wooden bucket filled with ice-cold water. Carry this to the top of the hill, Kaiden said. No spilling. Ren blinked. That's it? Just carry a bucket? Kaiden's expression didn't shift. A warrior learns not through complexity, but through consistency. So Ren began climbing. The path was steep and uneven. Each step sent a slosh of water against the rim of the bucket. At first, he tried powering through with brute strength, tightening his grip, forcing his pace, but relying on raw effort. But halfway up the hill, his arms burned. Water leaked over the edges. His breath came in sharp bursts. By the time he reached the top, half the bucket was empty. Caden arrived moments later, unhurried, hands behind his back. Do you see? He asked. Ren shook his head, exhausted. See what? You tried to conquer the task, Caden said. But discipline is not conquest. It is alignment between breath, body, intention, and action. When these four are scattered, so too is your strength. Ren looked down at the diminished water level, frustration rising in his chest. "So what should I have done?" said Caden pointed to the horizon where dawn was beginning to bleed gold into the sky. Slow, steady, precise. Discipline is built one controlled moment at a time, not through force, but through attention. They descended the hill, and the exercise repeated. Again, Ren climbed. Again, the bucket wavered. Again, he failed. But with each attempt, something subtle began to shift. He breathed deeper. His steps became deliberate. His focus narrowed until the world consisted only of the bucket, his breath, and the path. On the fifth try, he reached the top, with nearly all the water intact. Kaiden nodded approvingly. "This is the ancient system," he said. Small acts repeated until precision replaces chaos. Ren wiped sweat from his brow. "But how does this help me face my fear, my failures?" Caden turned to him, eyes calm and unwavering. "Because fear thrives in disorder. When the mind lacks structure, fear fills the gaps. When your life lacks routine, doubt takes the throne. Discipline is the architecture that holds your spirit upright." Ren let the words settle. Kaiden continued. "In the warrior schools, discipline was not punishment. It was liberation. Structure frees the mind from confusion. Repetition frees the spirit from hesitation. Mastery is simply devotion over time." Ren looked at his hands gripping the bucket. The trembling had stopped. His breath was steady. "Your body already understands," Caden said. "Now your spirit must follow." They returned to the dojo. Ren expected rest. Instead, Caden handed him a wooden staff. "Now we train the body as we trained the breath." The next hour was a sequence of simple movements repeated until Ren's arms felt like they were forged from fire. Each strike, each block, each stance polished something inside him. Not strength alone, but focus. As sweat dripped to the wooden floor, Kaiden's voice echoed behind him. "Every repetition is a sharpening. Every discomfort is a stroke of the whetstone. Discipline is not about becoming stronger, but becoming clear." Ren exhaled, feeling the truth in those words. For the first time in years, his struggle felt meaningful. The afternoon sun cast long bars of gold across the dojo floor as Ren continued his training. His muscles trembled from exertion, but beneath the fatigue was something steadier. A growing sense of order inside him, like scattered pieces finally beginning to align. Caden watched him complete another sequence with the wooden staff. "Again," the old man said. Ren obeyed, breath controlled, stance grounded, movements clean. The staff cut through the air with a quiet whisper, no longer wild or uncertain. Each motion felt like a sentence in a language he was finally beginning to understand. When Ren paused to catch his breath, Caden spoke. "Do you know why repetition creates mastery?" Ren shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because repetition rewires the pathways of the brain. When you repeat a movement, a thought, a discipline, the neurons bind tighter, the pattern strengthens. What was once effort becomes an instinct. This is not ancient superstition. It is modern neuroscience, discovered thousands of years before science gave it words." Ren felt a spark of recognition. "So discipline changes the brain?" "It reshapes it," Keaton corrected, "just as the swordsmith folds steel again and again to remove impurities. Discipline folds the mind until doubt has no place left to hide." Ren absorbed the analogy like cool water. Caden gestured toward the far wall where an old ink scroll hung. Bold brush strokes formed a single character. Dwan, Tan, meaning to forge. This, Kaiden said, is the purpose of discipline, not obedience, not perfection, forging. Ren stepped closer to the scroll, tracing the character's shape with his eyes. He felt something stir inside him, a realization that discipline wasn't about restriction. It was about construction. Caden approached beside him. "You came to me broken," he said gently, "not because of failure, but because you lacked structure to support the weight of your own potential." Ren inhaled deeply, the truth landing with quiet force. Caden continued, voice steady as stone. When the samurai learned swordsmanship, they trained not to win battles, but to develop a mind that does not collapse under pressure. Discipline is the architecture of that mind. The hours stretched on. Ren scrubbed the dojo floors until they shone, raked the gravel path into precise lines, stacked firewood in perfect symmetry. At first, these chores felt pointless, mundane tasks disguised as training. But then he noticed something. Each task demanded focus, breath, alignment, patience. Each required him to quiet the noise in scenes. Each left him steadier than before. By evening, Ren realized the truth Caden had been guiding him toward. Discipline was not the task. Discipline was the person he was becoming through the task. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Ren knelt outside the dojo to cool his breath. The sky was a wash of purples and dying gold. Caden joined him, silent for a long moment. Finally, the old man said, "You carried your pain like heavy armor, but today you learned something important. Structure can carry what emotion cannot. When your actions are disciplined, your fears have less room to grow." Ren looked out over the forest, feeling the quiet strength settling into him like roots. "I never understood," Ren said softly, "why routine mattered." "It matters," Caden replied, "because the world is unpredictable, but your habits can be made unbreakable." Ren nodded slowly, letting the lesson carve itself deeper into him. Caden stood, offering a rare smile. Faint, but real. "You are ready," he said. "Tomorrow, you will face what you have feared most." Ren's heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" "The darkness," Caden answered. "The shadow you have never dared to meet." A cold wind swept across the mountain ridge, as if echoing the weight of the coming challenge. Chapter 4. Facing the Shadow. The war within night came quickly in the mountains. Not gently, but with a sudden consuming darkness that felt almost deliberate. The sky above was a vast, moonless canvas. The forest below murmured with unseen life, each sound sharp in the chill air. Ren stood at the edge of the tree line, heart pounding, breath visible in the cold. Caden stood beside him, hands folded calmly behind his back. "This," Caden said, "is your true training ground." Ren swallowed hard. "What am I supposed to do?" "You will sit alone in the forest," Caden replied. "No fire, no light, only your breath and your mind." A knot tightened in Ren's stomach. He had expected physical tests, maybe even combat drills, anything but this. Caden continued, "Every warrior must meet the shadow within. Until you face your inner darkness, your strength is incomplete." Ren looked toward the path descending into the woods. The darkness felt alive, almost breathing. What if What if I'm not ready? Caden turned to him, and in the faint starlight, Ren saw neither softness nor cruelty, only clarity. No one is ready, Caden said. That is why we go. Ren nodded shakily. Caden placed a hand on his shoulder. Remember your breath. Presence cuts through fear the way a blade cuts through fog. Ren stepped forward into the forest. The trees swallowed him immediately, the sounds shifting from familiar to foreign. Crickets hummed, branches creaked, the ground crunched softly beneath his feet. His imagination filled in what his eyes couldn't see, shapes between the trunks, movement in the underbrush, shadows that seemed to pulse. He found a small clearing and sat cross-legged, just as Caden had taught him. The darkness pressed in. At first, he focused on his breath, slow, deliberate, controlled. But soon, the thoughts came. You're going to fail. You don't belong on this path. You're weak. Always have been. Ren clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. But the silence of the forest amplified everything inside him. Every regret, every memory that still stung. He remembered the moment his project collapsed, the disappointment in the eyes of people he respected, the silent, crushing weight of feeling like he wasn't enough. His breath faltered. Fear rose like smoke inside his chest. Suddenly, a branch snapped somewhere in the dark. Ren's pulse spiked. His mind spun into panic. There's something out there, something watching, something waiting. Instinctively, he stood up, ready to run. But then, he heard Kaiden's voice in his memory. Fear speaks in the language of imagination. Presence speaks in truth. Ren forced a breath, then another. He slowly sat again. His hands trembled, but he kept them on his knees. He felt the pounding of his heart, as if it were trying to escape. Minutes stretched into something timeless. Then, something shifted. The fear did not disappear, but it softened, revealing something beneath it. Sadness. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a quiet ache, the kind that had lived inside him for years without his permission. He whispered to no one. I didn't know I felt this much, and for a moment, the forest felt like it heard him. Ren inhaled, this time deeper, steadier. He was still afraid, but he was no longer running from the feeling. The night pressed in, but he did not break. Ren sat in the clearing, the darkness thick around him, the air cold enough that each breath hovered briefly before dissolving into nothing. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. Yet he did not rise, he did not flee. His fear was still there, alive, whispering, shifting like a shadowed animal. But something inside him had begun to root. Caden once said, fear is the gatekeeper of truth. Pass through it, and you meet yourself. Ren inhaled slowly, and the gate began to open. His mind drifted into memories he had spent years avoiding. The moment he watched his hard work unravel, emails unanswered, opportunities slipping away, the sharp sting of judgment from people he wanted to impress, the night he quit before trying again, the silent hours afterward. But when he convinced himself he had failed because he was fundamentally flawed. In the dark forest, those memories rose like ghosts. But strangely, they did not crush him. Instead, they stood at a distance. Visible, contained, stripped of the overwhelming power they once held. Silence had carved space around them, transforming them from monsters into reflections. Ren whispered, why was I so afraid of you? The memories did not answer. But the realization came on its own. He wasn't afraid of the events. He was afraid of what he told himself about them. Afraid of being worthless. Afraid of being incapable. Afraid of being seen as not enough. The forest seemed to breathe with him. A faint rustling to his left made him flinch. But he didn't run. His nerves still fired with instinct. But his awareness was different. He was no longer reacting blindly. He remembered Caden's teaching. Fear does not strengthen the senses. Presence does. So Ren focused not on the imagined danger, but on what was real, the pattern of his breathing, the feeling of soil beneath his palms, the cold air against his skin, the subtle trickle of wind through leaves. With each detail he noticed, the imagined threats shrank. Slowly, the darkness stopped being a predator. It became a container, a space big enough to hold everything he feared. Ren closed his eyes, sinking deeper. Suddenly, his mind conjured an image, himself standing on a path, a younger version of him, eyes full of hesitation. Behind that younger Ren was a wall of fog, and in that fog, shapes of all the choices he never made, because fear convinced him otherwise. The visual struck him like a blow. He heard Kaiden's voice again, not as memory, but as if carried by the wind. The enemy is not fear. The enemy is the life you surrender when you obey it. Ren exhaled shakily. He felt the truth unravel through him. Fear wasn't trying to destroy him. It was trying to protect him from pain. But in doing so, it had caged him. And he had lived for years behind that invisible barrier. Tonight, in the forest, the barrier cracked. Ren placed a hand over his chest. His heartbeat was still fast, but it no longer meant danger. It meant awakening. He looked into the dark and whispered, "I'm not running anymore." For the first time, the night felt less like an enemy and more like an equal, a vast mirror showing him who he truly was when all distractions were removed. Hours passed. He didn't know when they ended. But dawn began its slow return, a pale silver rising between the trees. Ren stood, stiff but grounded, and made his way back toward the dojo. Caden waited for him at the edge of the clearing, hands behind his back, as always. "You met your shadow," Caden said. Ren nodded. "I didn't defeat it. I just listened." Caden's eyes softened. "That," he said, "is victory." The first light of morning illuminated Ren's face. He looked different, not hardened, but sharpened. Chapter 5, Forging the Inner Blade. Dawn unfolded gently across the mountains, laying soft bands of gold over the dojo. The air carried a cool clarity, as if the world itself had been sharpened overnight. Ren ascended the final steps toward Kaiden, each footfall steady, grounded, transformed by the night he had survived. Kaiden stood on the veranda, waiting with the stillness of a centuries-old tree. His expression gave nothing away, yet Ren sensed he already knew everything that had taken place in the forest. "You return different," Kaiden said. Ren bowed his head. "I feel different, not stronger, but lighter, as if something loosened inside me." Kaiden nodded. "That is the nature of facing one's shadow. We do not grow by killing what we fear, but by dissolving the illusions that enslaved us." Ren breathed in deeply. "I understand now. Fear wasn't the enemy." "No," Kaiden replied. "Fear was the fire, but the blade remains to be forged." He stepped aside and revealed a small wooden box resting from the dojo floor. Ren approached slowly. Caden gestured for him to open it. Inside lay an unfinished blade, dull, heavy, its surface rough and unpolished. It looked nothing like the elegant swords Ren had seen in museums or stories. Instead, it looked raw, honest, waiting to become something more. Ren touched the metal carefully. It was cold, like the forest before dawn. "This," Caden said, "is your spirit as it stands now. Strong but unrefined. Capable, yet unshaped." Ren looked up. "You want me to sharpen it?" Caden shook his head. "We will sharpen it. Together. Every stroke will reflect a truth you have earned." They carried the blade outside to a flat stone where a whetstone waited, its surface smoothed by countless hands. Caden knelt first, holding the unfinished blade at an angle. "Steel becomes sharp through friction," he said, "through pressure, contact, and persistence, and so does the human spirit." He guided Ren's hands, showing him the motion. Slow, steady, deliberate. The sound of metal sliding across stone sliced through the morning air. A gentle hiss, rhythmic and clear. Ren repeated the motion alone. The blade scraped, resisted, then yielded to the process. Caden watched with quiet approval. "Do you remember the day you believed your failure ended your path?" he asked. Ren nodded, the memory still vivid. "That pain," Caden said, "was your first stroke on the whetstone. It revealed what was untrue in you. It humbled you. It opened you." Ren's grip tightened slightly. "Then why did it feel like destruction?" "Because you mistook dark transformation for loss," Caden answered. "The ego collapses before the spirit can rise." Ren exhaled slowly. The words resonated with every part of his journey. The silence, the discipline, the shadow. He shifted the blade, continuing to sharpen it. Caden circled him slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "Every repetition today, will echo a lesson you've learned. Silence taught you to observe. Discipline taught you to align. Fear taught you to witness truth. Now, you forge these into shape." Ren continued the motion until his arms ached, but this pain felt different, purposeful, alive, connected to something larger than himself. He paused for a moment, staring at the metal. Lines of brightness had begun to form along the edge, faint but visible. "It's changing," Ren whispered. "Yes," Caden replied, "as are you. Slowly at first, then unmistakably." A breeze swept across the mountain, carrying with it the scent of cedar and distant earth. Ren lifted the blade, seeing the softened light reflect off it. "It still isn't sharp," Ren said. Caden stepped beside him. "No," he agreed, "and neither are you. Not yet." Ren looked at him, breathing deeply, ready for the next step. Caden held his gaze and said, "But now you are forgeable." Ren continued sliding the blade across the whetstone, each motion measured, patient, intentional. The morning grew brighter, illuminating the fine metal shavings forming along the stone's edge. His arms trembled from the effort, but there was a steadiness beneath the fatigue, a rhythm he had never felt before. Caden watched him in silence for a long time. Then at last he spoke. "Most people chase strength," he said, "but the warrior cultivates sharpness." Ren paused. "What's the difference?" Caden knelt beside him, lifting the blade gently with 2 fingers. "Strength pushes. Sharpness cuts. Strength exhausts. Sharpness penetrates. A strong man can force his way through the world, but a sharp man can move through it with precision, clarity, and purpose. He handed the blade back, and clarity, Caden continued, is born only from a refined spirit. Ren resumed sharpening, letting those words settle. The scraping of metal blended with the sound of morning wind sweeping across the mountain, the world beginning to feel like part of the training itself. As he worked, Kaiden circled him the way he often did when teaching. You feared pain, Kaiden said, because you saw it as threat. Now you see it as information. You feared failure because you believed it defined you. Now you see it as refinement. Ren nodded quietly. I think I finally understand. Pain wasn't trying to stop me. It was trying to shape me. Caden's eyes softened with approval. Yes, just as heat shapes steel. Ren looked at the blade again, running his thumb carefully along its slowly emerging brilliance. But why give me this? Why a sword? Why not something symbolic, like a scroll or a lesson? Caden chuckled softly. The first time Ren had heard anything like amusement from him. What makes you think this is a sword? Ren blinked. Isn't it? Caden tapped the blade gently. This is metal. Nothing more. He tapped Ren's chest, right over the sternum. That is the blade. The meaning struck Ren with more force than any physical blow. The sword, Kaiden continued, is merely a metaphor, a mirror. What you sharpen here is what you sharpen within. Ren held the metal differently now, not as a weapon, but as a reflection. Hours passed. The sun climbed. The edge of the blade became clearer, more defined. And with each stroke, Ren felt pieces of his old self fall away. Fear softened. A doubt loosened. Ego quieted. Finally, Kaiden raised a hand. Enough. Ren stopped. His arms ached. Sweat darkened his clothes, but his spirit felt awake, alert, aligned. Kaiden took the blade, examined it carefully, then handed it back. It is not perfect, Kaiden said. Ren nodded. Neither am I. And that, Kaiden replied, is why it is ready. Ren exhaled, a long grounding breath. Kaiden motioned for him to stand. As you walk from this place, Kaiden said, you will carry no sword. You will carry the sharpness you have forged. In your breath, your discipline, your presence. The world will not test your weapon. It will test your spirit. Ren looked out over the forest, the same forest that had terrified him days before. Now, it felt like part of him. A memory a milestone, a teacher. Kaiden placed a hand on his shoulder. Your training here is complete, he said, not because you are fearless, but because you have learned to use fear as fire. Ren felt the truth settle deep within him. Not loud, not triumphant, but steady, unshakable. He bowed deeply, not to Kaiden alone, but to the journey that had reshaped him. Kaiden returned the bow. When you walk down this mountain, he said, walk as a warrior of clarity. Walk as a blade forged from silence, discipline, and truth. Ren stepped beyond the dojo's threshold. The world before him looked the same, but he did not. He was quieter, he was steadier, he was sharper. Moral pain does not destroy the warrior. It forges the spirit into something capable of walking the true path.